we'll start by just, if you want to say what your viewpoints on government are. I know you have said you're a voluntarist before. If you can sort of expand on that.
Well, if you're jumping right into it, man, we got to like preface this debate a little bit better, because this is going to be a really fun conversation. I'm really looking forward to this. And as you pointed out, we have like it's really almost eerie the similarities that we have. Combat veteran coming back, dealing with PTSD in the VA, owning land, going through this political transformation, experimenting with different drugs and hallucinogens, and then dealing with the government in terms of what we want to do with our land. I mean, if you think about it, it all kind of fits together, and it kind of makes you appreciate how like almost not special we are as veterans. That like, a lot of veterans are going through, a very similar trajectory coming home. And I'm really excited about this conversation, because there's well, first of all, I got to say about this debate, we lost 2 moderators before. We're doing this debate without it. We're supposed to have like a formal, like, you get 3 minutes, you get 3 minutes, and here's a moderator, and it's I think it's more appropriate that we're having this conversation like this. But we lost our 2 moderators, at least the first one, because they were being threatened by Antifa. That Antifa doesn't want us to have this conversation. I mean, that's just it's silly. But there's something that I respect about you, Kevin, as a fellow warrior, as someone who has really taken, and I almost hate that word warrior, because we say it in the Marines so often, like, come on, warriors, like, rah, rah. It's like it's almost like this corny cliche. And I want to say just to any other veterans out there, a couple weekends ago, I did this amazing experience this weekend with Wake for Warriors. And I highly recommend it if you want to go wakeboarding or wake surfing. Amazing group of guys that put this together. Check them out. But it got me thinking about this thing of like, what does it mean to be a warrior and someone who's willing to sacrifice to stand up for justice, someone who's willing to put their life on the line for what they believe to be right. And I think there's kind of an identity crisis right now in America's warrior class. And I wanted to point that out, because I think this conversation can go a long way to helping that out. So before I jump into my exact political philosophy, Kevin, I mean, you have any other, prefaces to this conversation you want to put out there?
Well, I'll just say, I don't know what you read about me online or what anybody told you, but I don't identify as Republican or Democrat or alt-right or alt-light. In fact, I sort of hate all those titles, especially now. It's getting ridiculous with a lot of these groupings. I would say more than anything.
Are you saying you don't like labels?
Yeah, I think, I call myself a Nazi, like NOT-C, not communist, because that's pretty much what I am. If anybody is against left-wing ideologies, I'm okay with them. But
yeah, I came up with the label for people who don't like labels. You're an anti-labelist, and now you have a label. So there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I call myself a nationalist and a populist, but those are more generic.
There we go. Now we're putting a finger on something meaningful, but we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no. So, I believe that I would like to see a libertarian state, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I guess we can start just by me saying that I think that there are some major roadblocks in the way. And realistically, I'd say that I'm more in favor practically of traditional republicanism or some sort of localism.
Okay, well, voluntarism starts from the premise of self-ownership. That is an independent consciousness in your own body. By virtue of being a human, you own yourself. And this is the foundation for ethics, right? Why is it wrong to hit someone in the face? Because you're violating their self-ownership. Why is it wrong to steal something from someone? Because you're violating their property that is inherent to their self-ownership? Why is it wrong to kidnap someone? Because you're taking away the agency of freedom of movement that is inherent to self-ownership. And so to put this in positive terms, the prescription is that all human relationships should be voluntary, that is, free of force and fraud and coercion. And that's really just the only consistent, just every consistent vision of ethics, of morals, has to have some similar premise to what I just described. Otherwise, it's not, it doesn't have that basic respect for the reality that is the foundation of ethics, of morals, because that is inherent to our existence as an independent consciousness. So when you apply this to government, you go, holy crap, government. And I know you've gone through this, right? I'm not like giving you any new ideas, Kevin. You go, holy crap, government's illegitimate. And you go, wow, it's all coercive. It's all based on pointing guns at people who are acting peacefully. If you don't pay your taxes, you get locked in a cage. If you don't follow the rules, you get locked in a cage. If you resist getting locked in a cage, you get shot or forcibly put in a cage. If you have property that the government doesn't want you to have, it just takes it from you. If the government controls territory that it doesn't want you to be in, it forces you to stay out of that. And you go, well, wait a second, that can't be right. And it's really tempting. And I think a lot of people who go through this ideological exploration, they see that and they go, wow, what a simple, beautiful ideal, and therefore government's illegitimate and we have to get rid of government. The sooner the better. We'll all be happier. People will be peaceful and voluntary and cooperative and harmonious without this unethical institution that is the cause of so much, not just pain and suffering, but chaos and division. And leads to fighting and disorder and dysregulation of natural human relationships. And so we're often tempted then, and I think a lot of people who take to that extreme, and I kind of was in this space for a while myself of just like, hey, let me just render the old system obsolete by building the new one, as Buckminster Fuller would have said. Let me just homestead, right? Like, I'm going to buy my own property. I'm going to build a home. I'm going to try to set an example. I'm going to practice agorism, which is practicing, free market relationships, not paying taxes, doing your business outside of supervision of government. But most people, are driven by some kind of emotional response. And I think I was, especially as a veteran. I mean, Kevin, I don't know how much this has affected you, but it's taken me. I mean, I was in combat in 2004.
Me too.
It was 2004. Yeah. Shit, man, we're old. It's like crap. We're turning into like what we thought of Vietnam vets as, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe. It was 15 years ago now. It's unbelievable.
So, I mean, did you have a strong, emotional response to your military experience that motivated your activism, your political exploration?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people join the military for different reasons, and I think I joined it more just out of boredom and longing for adventure. Especially, I joined right after September 11th. So, I knew there was going to be some sort of conflict, and I had heard my grandpa's stories from World War II. And I just thought, well, this is going to be something that's going to change history, and I want to be a part of it. I could have gone to college anywhere. My parents were well enough off to where I could have gone to college, done anything I wanted as a kid. But I joined the military for that sense of camaraderie and adventure. And so I had maybe a different circumstance than a lot of people. But once you get into that situation and you meet those people, especially with the trauma of war, you get so many emotions that go through you at such a short time span at a young age that it really shapes who you are the rest of your life. And, when I got out the Army and I had PTSD and I was injured, I saw a really horrible example of how government fails people. And I lost friends. I can get into all that, but I'll keep it short. I I lost friends because the VA was bad and the system didn't care about us, the same people that they exploited, many of them, for their blood and service. So, yeah, I mean, it's something that really shapes your opinion. And then afterwards, traveling around the world, seeing what Marxism has done to countries, it's something that really made me want to become more of an activist. And I think that I went through the same sort of place you're at with libertarianism, where I was very much about just sticking to myself. You know, my parents bought me and my brother some land out in Louisiana next to their place, and it's on a big lake in the national forest there. Beautiful land. I could live there the rest of my life. No neighbors around, hunt for my own food, fish for my own food, you know, buy what I need at the farmer's market, and I would be a happy man. But I know that after I saw what happened with the Bundys and what was going on under Obama with the land grabs, I knew that government was not going to leave us alone.
So it's funny, you said you were motivated by traveling to foreign countries, by seeing the effect of Marxism on different people. You don't have to leave America to see how bad Marxism can be. You know, if you read the Communist Manifesto, the 10 planks, we've got like, what, 6 or 7 of them fully instituted in the United States and the others partially. You know, we have nationalized medicine, nationalized education policy. We have a nationalized currency. I mean, we could keep going and into all of those. But what I wanted to, what I think is more important in talking about, you know, our demographic of veterans is that what you said about your vision of, you know, your parents, your father's war, your grandpa's war, right? That even if it wasn't part of your family, we all have that sort of mythology that we want to live up to. And there's one of the things that I learned, and I don't know about your take on this, but studying history, you learn that World War II, World War I, Vietnam, I mean, basically every war is a racket. I mean, Major General Smedley Butler wrote a book called War is a Racket.
Right.
This is the most decorated Marine in military history, or second most. And there's an important thing that we have that the other generations didn't, is that, well, they have, you could say they had better lies for their wars. You know, they could really believe them. You know, and if you want to, like, we don't have to play, you know, history revisionism in this conversation, but we know that even if there's a just side in a war, there's an unjust side in a war, and the point of war is always poor men dying to line rich men's pockets. And when
it's like that System of a Down song, right? Why they always send the poor.
Yeah. Why do they always send the poor? Because rich kids don't fight in wars because their parents tell them what the racket is all about, and they let the rest of us, you know, sign blank checks with our lives, laboring under this delusion that war is glorious and righteous. And for even those who still do believe in the myth of Iraq and Afghanistan, and there aren't very many. I mean, like, even among, you know, the general population, there's hardly anybody left who thinks that the war in Iraq was a good idea, or well executed, or like any or worth it for America. You know, I mean, nobody. And so when I come home and I go, well, fuck, you mean I saw my buddies die for lies? And it's like there's a faster information cycle, you know, where you see, like, the accountability for government bullshit is just that much faster. And I think there are a lot of guys right now. I mean, even, you know, for me, 14 years since I was in combat, you know, 12 years since I got out of the military, there were still a lot of guys behind us, you know, by a few years. And what I think people don't realize about being in the military is that it stunts your intellectual growth. It stunts certain parts of your process of naturally intellectually maturing, because it replaces your free will and your individual sense of purpose and creativity with obedience and structure and you know, being a part of an organization of command and control and obedience to, or immediate, unthinking, unquestioning obedience to orders. So when I took all of that, and I was still, very angry. It was really tempting to say, let's have, another solution of force. And then it was philosophically I came to voluntarism, and I was still angry, and I wasn't really engaged. And I made a big mistake in my understanding of government. And it's funny because when I became a libertarian, or rather realized that I was a libertarian, and when I started speaking out like professionally, and I had my radio show, my TV show, and doing stuff online, I always like really prided myself in understanding the true nature of government. But there was one thing that I was really missing, which is that government is a product of the public paradigm. It's a product of, Alexis de Tocqueville said in 1831, Democracy in America, in a democracy, if people will get the government they deserve. And that's really true in any system of government. And I think it was Frederick Douglass who said that the limits of tyranny are prescribed by the tolerance of the oppressed. And so, like, what you'll put up with, whatever you're going to put up with, there's going to be some asshole in a suit there to put that in an institution to take advantage of everybody. And that's, what government is, but it's made up of people. And one of the most important understandings for me, and I think for our generation of veterans, is that I was willing to kill for politicians. I signed up to do that. I was the most evil, unthinking, negligent part of government. The soldier who follows orders without questioning their morality. And
I just want. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm just saying that's tough to admit, and that's a long process that people got to come out of. And if we can come out of it, you and I know that, Betty working at the DMV who hates her job can damn sure say, yeah, fuck the system.
Well, I think, I think that's sort of a great idea, but it may be wishful thinking. I just want to say before we move away from this, my brother's in Iraq right now, and there are lots of people in the military who do it because it's comfortable. I'm still enslaved by that system because I get a retirement check from them, so I could do without it. I would gladly give up my retirement check if we could dissolve the government tomorrow. But let's face it, most people are not like that. Most people, and the bigger the government gets, the worse that problem will grow, because you have more people who rely on it for subsistence.
Well, this is now we can make a transition here. I think that's a perfect segue to, what's the answer? Because, like I said, I really held that ideal of a stateless society, of a voluntary society. And it's important to recognize that it's just an ideal, because the moment someone, gets drunk and punches somebody else in the face, for the guy getting punched, it's not voluntary, obviously. But we can talk about the ideal that is much more reasonable of a society that understands as the dominant paradigm that peaceful, nonviolent, voluntary cooperation and using persuasion to get people to do what you want to do is always going to be better for everybody than using force and coercion to get people to do what you want to do. But what you said is so important, that about the dependency and the paychecks and that comfort. And it's funny that you mentioned the comfort in terms of someone who's in the military. And that's real. I hate to go back for a second, but it's really important to point out that this is how they propagandize you, is that if this is tied into the government education system. When they beat out your creativity, your sense of self, your sense of confidence as an individual, it means that it's comforting. Like, you go through the first how many years of your life where your main job is to sit in what is called cemetery row seating and be told not how to think, but what to think. Of course, it's going to be more comfortable for you to stay in an institution and feel like you have a sense of purpose in the military than to get out and be an actual, human being with a sense of self and an individual sense of purpose. But to the dependency thing. Oh, sorry, I knocked my camera here. That's really important to acknowledge in terms of how do we move forward from this, because you don't want to pull the rug out from underneath anybody. And this is why I think that localization is not only the best way to do this, but the way that we're most likely to achieve this. Because I can't convince you as easily that you should believe in my exact philosophy than to say you'd be better off if California was independent from the rest of the country. You'd be better off if your state was sovereign and the government that you get is based on your needs and your community, as opposed to a big centralized system that's always going to inherently be more corrupt. So I don't have to argue with you or anybody else about the role of government to say, can you agree that it should be localized? And when I say localized, I don't mean subsidiarity in the Catholic Church concept of we're still going to have this big pyramid, but we're going to put the work at the bottom. What I mean is everybody gets their sovereignty respected. There is, people say, do you want a top-down or a bottom-up structure? Neither. There should be no, and when it comes to political authority, that is authority by the barrel of a gun, no one should be able to use that authority over other people. It should be a voluntary system where, yes, you can have hierarchy. I'm all for, organizations with leadership and companies and whatever. I'm not opposing that, but it's got to be voluntary and ethical. And if you so for like you say, communism as you're a Nazi, right? I would take the position that as a voluntarist. Well, first of all, every family unit, you think of the traditional American nuclear family, right?
Right.
That's a communist organization, generally speaking, right?
Communal organization. Right.
Right. Well, no. It's in an economic sense at its core. Now, obviously, there are exceptions, and there are approximations and whatnot. But essentially, how does a family run? From each according to their ability to each according to their need. That's how a family works. But it's voluntary, except for the kids who are born into that situation, right? But for as soon as they're able to have independent agency and leave, it's voluntary. For the parents creating that situation, it's voluntary. And I don't think I have a right to go into your home and say, you can't run your family that way. And similarly, I don't have a right to go into your community where it's all private property that I don't own. You have a community, it's all private property. If you want to run that community as communist or socialist, as long as it's not a prison, you're not holding anybody captive there, and you're not imposing it on anybody else, I would want to rather ethically respect your right to have a communist little cult and let you fail or succeed or peter out on your own. That's fine, because you have to respect that fundamental choice and individual sovereignty. So that's how I see this coming about. And this is why this is the premise of my presidential campaign, running for the Libertarian nomination in 2020 on the platform of throwing the ring directly into the fire, declaring the federal government bankrupt and putting it through a peaceful, orderly, responsible bankruptcy proceeding that leaves us with 50 independent states. And I see you've got so much you're just dying to say. I'll shut up now.
No, it's all right. So I want to get into your presidential campaign because I think that will transition to what I want to say next. But I want to start by saying, I don't think that the family unit is communist. And when I say communist, of course, I'm referring to Marxist philosophy and how it presents itself today. When you see what's going on in America right now, the government growing, the debt growing, the people on the left, the cultural Marxism, all of that happening in this country, and people losing more and more freedoms, it's not just the government that's our enemy anymore. One, I think it's the government, but it's also the technocracy or the big tech companies, and I don't want government to rein those in. And that sort of makes me think that our last solution is going to have to break the non-aggression principle of voluntarism, which is to do like Hans Hermann Hoppe says and start physically removing problem people. And I'm sure you've heard the whole high trust society argument before. And so I want a high trust society. I think it's necessary. I had a college professor who once told me libertarianism is a privilege for rich white men who are well educated. And that does seem to ring true. At least they're the only people who are emotionally and intellectually invested in trying to build that high trust, cooperative, and voluntarist society. So what do we do with the rest? And I want to sort of lead in with that question into your presidential campaign, which I do support, by the way. And if you become president, I want to be your Secretary of Veterans Affairs or whatever you turn that into, so I can help those veterans.
Oh, hold on. All right, Kevin, if you're going to bring that up, you are certainly in the running here. And I am really excited, actually. You know, I'm in Prescott today. There's a reason I'm doing this from my vehicle right now instead of from the space that I normally do interviews at home. I finally decided that I need a hearing aid. I've had people in my life like, Adam, go get a hearing aid. Adam, you just stop mishearing. Go get a hearing. No, because like I'll mishear like shit in the funniest way, you know. But I spent an hour and a half on the phone today with the VA just trying to get an appointment. The first hour was just trying to get someone on the phone. Then I actually drove into the VA here in Prescott, and because I was told it's just another like, oh, I spent 3 hours today with the VA getting nothing done but making appointments for 2, 3, and 3 weeks out from now. But no, so the VA, it's really simple. And to take a step back in the campaign platform, every single agency of the federal government will either be localized, liquidated, or liberated, as in spun off. So either it gets like the Department of Transportation. Hey, every state already has a Department of Transportation.
Right.
Piece of cake, right? IRS, done, liquidated. Get rid of the IRS. We don't need it. But the VA is one that I would want to see spun off, because the VA has a lot of important resources. It provides legitimate function by any assessment. The only problem with the VA, well, not the only problem, but the primary ethical problem with the VA, and the reason it doesn't serve veterans, the reason it serves politicians instead of veterans, is because it's controlled by the bureaucracy. It's owned by government, and it doesn't exist, obviously, to actually help veterans. The purpose of the VA, if you understand that the purpose of government is exploitation, the real purpose of the VA is to convince high school young men and a few women, but mainly high school boys, that when you get out of the military, you'll be taken care of. So enlist. So you'll be a hero and you'll have smoke blown up your ass for the rest of your life. And it's not true. It's absolutely bullshit. There is a weird kind of hero worship of veterans in America. And the discounts are great, 10% at the hardware store. But the bigger reality is obviously one of a unique set of challenges, as you know, especially dealing with PTSD, dealing with the VA, dealing with limited employment situations, all of the family, legal, substance abuse challenges, everything that goes along with that. So my answer to the VA is really, really simple. Give it to the veterans. You spin it off, you give it an endowment as you liquidate the rest of the federal government, because you just can't fund the VA by taxes anymore. No matter how much you like veterans or like the VA as an institution, it's still wrong to point guns at taxpayers and say, you're going to pay for this because I like it. So
you could give every veteran $1 million credit card and it would still be cheaper than the VA.
Oh, yeah, no, it's insane. So simpler though, but because you do want to preserve the institution. We spin it off, we give it an endowment, and you give every single veteran in America one ownership voting share in the VA. I guarantee you end the drug war and you give the veterans the VA, you're not going to have 22 veterans committing suicide a day.
Okay, so let's talk about my other point, and you know, we can get to the thing I said about physical removal too. How do we
Yeah.
get rid of the people who are resisting? But my other point, I understand you want to dissolve the government, and I'm a big fan of the idea of co-ops and things like that. I think we should have tried to build a breakaway organization that competes with the government and with certain private corporations a long time ago. We should have people on the right should have tried to form their own co-ops and our own organizations to help with veterans, to help with other functions. But what about the technocracy? What about the big corporations that sort of stand in the way of our freedom?
Yeah, this is one I'm actually somewhat personally intimate with, having made my living for several years on YouTube before it was bought by Google, and now I get emails like a couple times a week. It's just been a steady flow over and I have about 3,000 videos on YouTube. This video has been demonetized because it's been flagged by the community, and now it has a warning in front of it, and you have to say that you're okay with crazy material if you're going to watch this video, and you know Adam's not going to make any money off of it. So and I've been censored a lot on Facebook, you know, and that's very typical now. Nobody believes that these are free speech platforms. So there's sort of two approaches to this, and the first is that you have to understand how we got to this situation as we know it, and this is in order to understand this, you have to understand not just corporatism, not just all of the policies that the federal government has enacted that favor large existing corporations, that make it more difficult to compete with them with new businesses, all of that, of course, but also the intellectual property racket. And this is a really tough issue for a lot of people to understand because, again, it's been something we've been propagandized from a very young age as part of the assumption that if you create an idea in your mind, you own it. But this idea is just so ridiculous on its face because it requires, in order for the government intellectual property racket to really be enforced, it's using the violence of government to impede the free flow of ideas and data. And that's what we're talking about here. And if you look at the music industry, you can see how the music industry in particular has been destroyed by intellectual property. And it's now, in the age of the internet, starting to recover. But over the last 100 years, we saw the transition from every song is a folk song, and you can just pick up an instrument and start singing it, and no one's going to sue you, to the rise of the record industry because of the technology that you had with records, vinyl, and all the other, you know, physical media for music. And that created an industry that wanted protection. So it came up with music as intellectual property as the protection racket. Now, it didn't come up with it, obviously it was around before that, but it really accelerated the implementation of that. And what you end up with is people going, and this is like a cliche from our youth, again, making me feel freaking old here, but you say, man, everything on the radio sucks, right? It's all the same pop music. It's all the same shit over and over again. It's all this, you know, pushed by record, you know, executives, and it's Britney Spears and, you know, Christina Aguilera, and it's all the same pop crap over and over again, and the Jonas Brothers and Justin Bieber, and music's gone to hell. Well, there's a reason for that. It's not like suddenly people's taste in music, like our brains all changed. No, it's because of that intellectual property. So if you apply that same idea of respect for intellectual freedom, for not taking credit for recombining other people's ideas, which is all you're doing. I mean, I wrote a book and I don't make any claims to intellectual property to it because it's arrogant to say, well, I wrote a book, therefore you can't copy this text. I didn't invent the language. I didn't come up with those words. I didn't even come up with most of those ideas. And I proudly say that about my book because, you know, it's an assimilation of libertarian philosophy that lots of other people have been talking about before. So look at Facebook and MySpace. And
Sure.
you know, I'm sure you saw the movie The Social Network, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So with Zuckerberg as a Harvard student and the origins of Facebook, and the Winklevoss twins fighting over this. Well, the entire premise is that you can't just copy the website. Well, why not? Why? Because of intellectual property. And the result is that we have these tech titans that control so much intellectual property that if I always have intellectual property, and if the government wasn't protecting that, you wouldn't have that in the first place. Now, excuse me, the second approach here is, how do we solve this problem? And there are really two answers. And one is obviously get government out of the intellectual property racket. You'll see a great leveling of the playing field. You'll see a great decentralization of the economic powers when anybody can just copy anybody's code online and create a better version of it. Basically, everything becomes open source. But that's the real answer, is that we are innovating our way out of this with blockchain technology. And it's kind of like the cat's out of the bag. Now, if I may step back historically in terms of my perspective, I see humanity progressing to, if not a stateless society, certainly a voluntary society and a more peaceful one. And this is Professor Steven Pinker at Harvard. I cite him all the time. He gave a great TED talk about this, about the decline in violence historically, that it follows kind of a radioactive decay curve, coming down like this over time, where we are living in the most peaceful times in human history right now. You are less likely today than ever before to be subject to violence at the hands of another human being. I think that is inherently tied to the progress of the human intellect, of just intelligent life. This is what it does. It creates technology. It gets better with every generation. We get smarter and more capable. And the value of 1 hour of human labor in terms of producing quality of life is just going up and up and up with technology. And so we have these problems in the current state that are a part of this 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards process. But I think both in terms of government as a whole, but especially with money, especially with Bitcoin, especially with cryptocurrency, we're on the verge of to use another well-worn term, a great leap forward for America, for humanity, and for freedom as a whole. I think that's inherent to our progress as a species. And that's sorry, I keep screwing up my camera here.
Oh,
that's something
right. I mean, that all sounds, I understand that all sounds very communistic of you. I'm just kidding, of course. But when you talk about doing away with intellectual property and all of these other things, I agree to an extent. I agree that these companies are given license by the government, and that creates these monopolies. But a lot of these companies would still exist whether or not government did or not, because people have money. I tend to break society down into 2 groups. One group are the people who want to live and let live, and the other group are the busybodies. And the busybodies who have money will try to control the minds of the people who just want to live and let live, or not them necessarily. The lower classes are the more what we might call NPCs, the people who don't want to think for themselves and who will follow their lead blindly. And I think we talk about corporatism, but I think it's more Fabian socialism that we're seeing right now. And what their agenda for America is, and for the world, is very truly evil. And I think you could appreciate that from a libertarian standpoint. But my philosophy is not quite as hopeful in humanity as yours, nor as peaceful, I would say. I do think that society is progressing with less crime, and people might be getting along better now, or at least we pretend to get along better. But I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. Freedom has risk. Freedom is violence sometimes. And I do think that there's this scene in Dexter where he's sitting around at a barbecue and he's looking at all the guys cooking meat together. And he talks about how this is a tradition from caveman days when the beta males had to share their food with each other to survive, but the hunters could go out and kill the food and fend for themselves. And I think society has hunters and then the betas, and that's what we're still seeing today. And unfortunately, the betas, with technology and with everything else that's happening, have more control over those of us who just want to live and let live.
So I want to address your bigger point there, but I really got hung up when you said freedom is violent sometimes, because freedom, if you define freedom, you take the time, just what is freedom? It's what you have when no one is forcing their will upon you. So if there's violence, you don't have freedom. So no, and you can say
somebody else might feel like they're free to kill you or take your stuff, and that's just the way of the world.
But then, okay, then you're saying, well, someone else could redefine that word. Yeah, okay, fine. But when you have actual freedom, by definition, that is nonviolence. That a free society is a nonviolent society. Because you can say that there's justified violence, right? You can say that there's legitimate defensive violence, but if you need to defend yourself, that means that someone is violating your freedom in the first place. So you don't have a free society if there's any kind of violence. But now I want to go.
Do we take preemptive action to make sure our freedom is guaranteed by using violence against those who would use the state or collectivize against us? And that's what's happening now. That's my question, because I think
right, no, and that actually raises, that gets back to the heart of a little bit more of what this sort of intellectual conflict might be about here. Now, because you say preemptive, and the question is, are you violating someone else's freedom? At what point are you violating someone else's freedom? Are you the aggressor? At what point are you the violent anti-freedom person in trying to achieve freedom? Because that's obviously you're going in the wrong direction if that's the case. So there is kind of a gray area of judgment in individual cases, and I'll break it down to like the individual level in a second here. But there's clear black and white on either side, right? So if I'm sitting here thinking, you know what? It would be really cool if I stole that painting behind Kevin. It's German. It's an antique. It's probably pretty valuable. You know, I could make a lot of money. I could really use the money right now. I could have, because since the VA isn't covering my dental care, and yeah, man, it'd be great. Now the question is, are you right at that point to come and punch me in the face to defend your property? Obviously not, right? But now say I come to your house. Right, and I come and knock on the door, and you know I'm looking at your painting, and I'm kind of looking at it suspiciously, you know, and I go, wow, that's a nice painting, and you think, wow, Adam looks like he might be trying to steal this painting, or he might be, and so it would be appropriate at that point for you to ask, right? It would be appropriate for you to investigate or to ask me to leave your property. But it would still be inappropriate for you to convict me, to presume me guilty, and just punch me in the face for, you know, standing in your house looking at your painting. Now,
right.
So here's where it gets gray.
Well, hold on.
If I'm actually reaching for the painting, you know, then maybe you're justified in saying, well, no, I got to smack his hand away. But you're not justified in shooting me. Right? Because it would have to be appropriate, proportionate. You wouldn't want to destroy the value of my life, which I presume, if only as a debt slave to you, right? That my life is worth more than that painting. So it would be an inappropriate, disproportionate response. So I'll connect this now to physical removal, as you you know, raised that before and correctly pointed out that really does, again, speak to the crux of this debate, that if you believe in ethics, you can only physically remove someone from your own property. You can only defend your own property. So this idea of physical removal, as Hoppe presents, and I know he's got a lot of arguments for this. I've confronted him in person about it, and I still know that he is dead wrong about this idea, because what he's suggesting is that you can claim to be a central planner, that you can claim special moral authority over other people's property. And not only is that wrong, but it's the kind of violence begets violence attitude that says, you know what, I'm going to throw away ethics, so I guess I shouldn't expect other people to treat me ethically. But if you treat others how you want to be treated, if you say, look, to the communists of America, I want you to be able to have your commune of whatever the heck you want to call it, however you want to organize it on your private property. Will you respect mine? Because if you won't, then you're going to get shot. But until then, let's respect.
Yeah, the answer is clearly no from them, though. I mean, they've shown us time and time again that they will always blame capitalists as long as capitalists exist. They will blame us for their failures and try to take what's ours. But I want to frame this same question a little differently, because private property is one thing. If somebody comes to my house and they try to steal from me, I personally believe that that's why I have this thing right here. But, you know, if we're talking about the situation America is in right now, where we are gradually being pushed into internet ghettos, ostracized, slandered, and dehumanized by a corporate media that works hand in hand with government and NGOs. We have our rights trampled on daily, and it gets worse and worse. And we know the outcomes of Marxism historically. At what point do we as Americans rise up? And because I don't think democracy will save us. I appreciate that you want to run for president, and hopefully America will elect somebody like you who will start to decentralize. But I think that's wishful thinking and utopian. I want to know what you think we should do to get us to that point when we can see right now that democracy is a rigged game.
Yeah, no, and I there was something you said too. There's a lot in there. I want to go back to. You said that the problem with communists, and this is where, and I kind of want to put you on the spot a little bit here. You said the problem with communists in America, the reason that you're tempted to pursue a policy of physical removal is that they want to use the violence of government to take your stuff and force communist policy on you, right?
Right.
How is that different from the Democrats and Republicans?
Well, I don't think it is, but I do think that there are certain groups. Look, the right is fractured right now. Don't get me wrong, and there are lots of people.
Hold on. No, I want to stick on this big point here. If your problem, because I'm gonna connect it to a bigger point that I hope is going to help you see where I'm coming from, because if you admit that the same problem that you point out with the communists is true of the Democrats and Republicans. And when I say Democrats and Republicans in this case, I don't mean just the parties and their leadership. I mean the base. Democrats, people who vote Democrat, Republican, vast majority of them support government taxes. They support government stealing from you to pay for stuff that they want. That's all of them. And I would now, the growing number of independents and libertarians and people who are sick of the system would suggest this number is shrinking, but it's still the vast majority. So if you say that the way to achieve a free society is to physically remove people who want to impose communist policy, you're talking about removing 2/3 of the American population. No, you're better off saying, let's create our own space where we can be free. But more importantly, do you really think it's going to be easier to remove 2/3 of the American population and force them out of this country than to convince a critical mass, just 51%, that we should respect each other's rights as individuals and community members, and at least at first as 50 independent states, to determine for ourselves, to have that right of self-determination of how our communities are going to be organized?
Well, obviously, no, I don't think it's realistic or plausible to physically remove your average Democrat or even the Antifa left, far left Democrats. I think what I would more like to see is people start to take action to get rid of the technocrats and the swamp, the people in Washington, D.C., and replace them with people who will cede power. But there is going to be massive resistance to that. And like I said earlier, we are seeing them dehumanize us. We are seeing them villainize us. And it's only, in my opinion, going to get worse. Now, I think there are other solutions. I think we could have a constitutional convention, a rally of the states, secession movements, things like that. And I like what the libertarians did in Keene with the Free State Project. I think they picked the wrong place and the wrong way of going about it, but even if we tried to break away, let's say we went to Texas, somewhere where there's resources, where we could grow a community big enough to stand up to the federal government. I think there is enough people right now who are sick of it and who are motivated by what's going on all over America and in the media and just in the zeitgeist, who would come into an area like that and try to build their own breakaway communities. But even if we did that, the left and when I say the left, I'm also talking about the billionaire elites, the technocrats, the billionaire elites who back the left, and neocons also. They would use fair housing against us. They would use every kind of environmental regulation against us to take back what we try to build there.
Okay, so I have so many answers to this, so many responses that I think are really important that you're not taking into account here. And one is that in order to do that, in order for the government or for those people to be able to use government violence against this group or whatever, they have to convince the enforcement class, the trigger pullers, the cops and soldiers, to actually go out and enforce those policies. Now, 1,000 years ago, you could pick up a spear as the alpha in the tribe and say, those guys, over there, they want to kill you, so go kill them first, right? You can't do that anymore. The lies are more sophisticated, but they're also easier to see through. So when, look at the end of the drug war that we're experiencing right now. You look at when Hurricane Katrina happened, even back in 2004, whatever it was, that they sent National Guard troops to confiscate firearms, and a lot of them said, "Screw that! We're not gonna go along with that." So I think there's a shift in the paradigm of the general population that is going to make it soon. Well, already it's harder for imagine if the government kept the drug war going right now. Like they just said, no, sorry, no state referendums, federal law supersedes everything. We're going to go arrest every pot smoker in America. Fuck you. Cops would be like, shit, we can't do that as it is. Like, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. And a cop would say, well, I have family members who smoke pot. I don't want them to go to jail. I have a family member who's a veteran whose life was saved by cannabis. I don't want them to go to jail. Like there's this, it's harder and harder and harder as we get smarter and more capable and more plugged in with the internet to lie to the enforcement class to get them to do that. So then I have two more points I want to make in response to that. And one is about localization and the thing with the communists. Give them what they want. This is the thing about localization. It's the everybody gets what they want strategy. You want a community that looks like this. You want a community that looks like that. You can have that with as many people as you can convince, persuade to voluntarily join your group, join your organization. If there are enough communists that want a little, private commune and they don't touch me, I want them to have that right. And then they're not going to come after me. That does not address, hold on, one more point, because this doesn't address, this is the third thing. This doesn't address your point about the super class using them against us, being able to lie, blah, 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 all of that. And you said things are getting worse. Again, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. You can say, look, the end of the drug war. I personally, as an Arizona resident with a medical cannabis card, am more free to decide what I put in my own body, at least on this one little count, than I would have been just 2 or 3 years ago here. That's a big step forward in freedom. And the decline in violence, that's not my opinion. I mean, I'm tempted to say that's fact because it's been academically demonstrated, but yeah, that's a fact. All the statistics bear out. And even you said crime is going down. Overall, the trend is clear. Yeah, you have Detroit, you have DC, you have these, steps backwards as a consequence of history unfolding. But the overall trend is very clear. And the reason I point that out to address your last objection here is that the super class, as the term that I use, but the elites, whatever, the people super rich, whatever you want to call them, what has motivated them. And by the way, anytime someone says I'm a presidential candidate, I have to say, no, you have to be a psychopath to want to be president of the United States. I'm throwing the ring in the fire. I'm resigning on day one to be the bankruptcy agent of the federal government. It's very important for me to make that distinction. I'm not a psychopath. But the things that cause the mental illness, because that's what it is. It's a disturbance. It's at very least an insecurity that leads someone to think $1 million isn't enough. A castle and guards isn't enough. I have to kill and slaughter and dominate and control and use violence. And I have to take advantage of other psychopaths who are willing to do violence for me in order to meet my needs for security, blah, blah, blah. And this psychopathy and the traits of that mental illness that leads someone to be a part of the superclass, they are passed down from generation to generation, not just by genetics, but by habit, by that family upbringing, where in the past, before, again, pre-internet, if you were a Rockefeller or a Warbuck, you could raise your kids in isolation. And you could tell your kids, you need to dominate the world. You need to carry on the family, and they don't know any better. But the kids of the superclass of our generation, they grew up with the same internet that we did. And all of the ways that is promoting positive mental health awareness, that is helping us get past that the mental illness of isolation and conditioning, you might be able to make the case that that's going to be a problem for another generation or two. I still think we overcome it with the other factors, but even if I'm wrong about that, that problem goes away relatively quickly in terms of human history. Things are accelerating.
Well, I think that they are in a way, but I think that some of that's also planned. Now, let me break this into two parts. You talk about the drug war. Yeah, the drug war, we have changed things and turned things around, but I think some of that is by design. I mean, it seems like there are a lot of elites who want drugs to be criminalized. If you took that same argument and said, hey, what about the war on guns? If you put a bunch of right-wing people out in Arizona in the desert and they all want to have guns, they are more villainized now than they were back when the FBI raided David Koresh's compound in the 90s. They would immediately be called racist, the enemy of the people, traitors, terrorists. And we saw that under Obama. And I think that's one argument. Now, the other thing I would say is that when you talk about, so I think the superclass, they pick their battles and they do still brainwash the people to think differently on certain issues. And they will protect their government monopoly by villainizing guns, by villainizing people on the right who want to do away with government. But also, when you talk about communists and the lemmings who follow communism or Fabian socialism in this case, because that's really what it is. It's communism for the lower classes, and they all stay poor and dependent on the state. And then the upper classes have technocratic rule where they control all the big companies and move in and out between private sector and government. That's what we're seeing now. And that's one of the most dangerous ideologies of all time, because that's what China has. And that is the model that they want for the rest of the world. Now, when I say the lemmings, if those communists want to go out and be communists on their own property, well, they already have that ability, but they don't, because these people don't want to work and they want to be part of this mainstream top-down system that gives them some sort of value in life, because they don't have any value or identity of their own. That's why they have to identify by race or gender or some other.
So let's trick them. Because they're wrong. Let's trick them into coming to the same conclusions about freedom that we have by saying, okay, we've got socialism everywhere. Why don't you get your socialism localized so that it's more customized socialism? And we'll have our customized freedom over here, and we'll see which works better.
Yeah, look, I think that's a great idea. A lot of people think Republicans are against socialized medicine, but I personally am not. I know many other people aren't, because here's the thing. If you want free health care, my grandmother worked in a community health clinic where the community all paid a tax for that health clinic. We could do the same thing with a co-op. If one county or one group of people want free medicine, they can pay into it together. But that's not going to work, because even in California, where everybody wants free medicine, they blame the failure of their vote for socialized medicine on the rest of the nation for not giving enough in taxes or taking too much from them.
So a lot of people are, libertarians or economic freedom oriented types are really tempted to look at the welfare state as a purely evil thing. And I agree that it is fundamentally unethical to steal from people to give to someone else because you want other people, the forced redistribution of wealth is morally wrong. That being said, the fact that we are capable, like, think about this for a second. The fact that we're not all hunters and gatherers anymore, right? We are able to support a huge amount of people being idle. That's actually like a measure of how far we've come economically as a species. We're capable of that. That's actually a really cool thing to appreciate. And what I always want to point out to libertarians, typically, we make the mistake of assuming that big government is always worse than small government. And to understand what the evil of government is, it requires a slightly more nuanced understanding. And I can prove with a little thought exercise here that big government is not always worse than small government. So I would ask you the question, would you rather have a huge government that's made up of half the population, but it's pretty peaceful, it respects individual liberties, human rights, and it exerts only enough coercion to maintain its monopoly on those big services, and in doing so, it kind of provides more or less what the market would provide anyway, but it's a huge government, right? Or would you rather have a tiny government that's just 1% of the population, but it murders every firstborn child? Obviously, a big government that's peaceful and doesn't murder people is favorable to a small government that murders a lot of people. So the conclusion of this thought exercise is that the evil of government is not measured merely by its size, but rather by how much it takes us off what our state of natural capitalist economic harmony would be, how much it harms productivity and individual freedom and our ability to prosper and actualize our own capabilities and potential in the world. So this again, if we can understand and separate the size of government from the violence of government, you go, well, yeah, I guess localization, let people have as much government as they want as long as it's voluntary and they're not forced on anybody else. It starts to make sense. I think, Kevin, I know in that you have a very well thought out intellectual position that you're presenting here. I think a lot of the people who share that, however, are motivated by a fear. And what I hear in a lot of the arguments that you're making here is that they are kind of fear-based. It's, well, what about this possible? What about this? What about that? And I've gone through that same thought process myself, but having faith in the fundamental truth of human freedom, of the non-aggression principle, self-ownership, of the progress of humanity, being able to calm my own emotions and fears and look at all those things rationally, you go, okay, all right, yeah, it's a possibility, but humanity overcomes, we innovate out of problems, we figure out better things every single day. Yeah, we'll probably be able to handle that too if it goes bad that way. What can we do then to maximize human progress? What can we do to accelerate this process in order to minimize human suffering in the meantime? And I think it's really two things, and it's spread these ideas, get more people talking about this. Even if you disagree, Kevin, with some of my conclusions, we agree on I think the most important practical conclusions, that government should be localized as much as we can practically make it possible under the current paradigm. And that the more people wake up, the more people think about these things, the better off we're all going to be. And I think that's the most important thing that I think people can take away from this.
I agree with you. I think, and in principle and theory, I'm 100% behind you. I guess, I understand what you're saying, that these are based in fear. And I have no problem admitting that I have a fear that people will use the state against me, that people will make things worse in America for my children, because I have kids. I want them to grow up in a country that had the same kind of opportunities and freedoms that I had or more. And I don't see us going that direction, especially with some of the things that are going on right now, like mass migration. I'm just trying to be a realist. But, you know, I want to live my own life. I want to be able to go hunt and fish for food. That's how I grew up. And I know that there are people who would say, well, you shouldn't have a gun, or you shouldn't be able to fish without a license. And I realize why those laws exist too, because people are irresponsible. And like I said, I think there are busybody beta males and then the alphas out there. And the busybodies want to control everybody, because the second somebody does one thing wrong, they look to, instead of physically removing that one person or the problem people, they want to punish the whole of society for it. Now, the other thing I will say is that one thing I see with libertarians a lot is they love to debate philosophy and theory. But when you talk about practical solutions, I think a lot of people are lost on that. And right now, I think we are in desperate need of practical solutions, because people like us are under attack.
Yeah, we need something that unifies people. And this is what Americans are really, really hungry for right now. And on my campaign bus, one of the slogans is, we don't have to be united under one government to be united in American values. And to me, that's so powerful. I wish it spoke to more people and other people really understood everything that I meant in that. But it's pretty obvious, right? That, you know, that America is not the government. I gotta say that again. 100%.
It's the people, and it's the founding principles of this country. And people way too often think that America is the government. And really, to me, America is flyover country. It's the farmers market. It's the people that make up, you know, the suburbs. It's the people that make up the cities. But unfortunately, we are being pitted against each other by that same ruling class that moves back and forth between the big corporations and government. And so again, I moved to either physical removal or, and this has been proven to work historically, our founding fathers did it, for God's sakes. But also, you know, maybe if we could get people on board, and Republicans specifically, because they are being isolated, because they are having their democratic voice taken from them, I think that we need a constitutional convention, or to move back and look at the Federalist Papers and our founding documents and see our answers in those, and maybe have legitimate secession movements. But I don't see a practical solution through democracy, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, sure. So I did. The reason I mentioned California is that actually earlier today, I did another debate, similar format to this. It was a friendly debate with Marcus Evans in California, who's doing CalExit and really pushing for California secession. And that would be by democracy. The majority of the people in California vote in a referendum that they want to be separate from the United States, and they elect a governor and a legislature that are going to carry that out. Now, one of the problems that you did point out about betas, you know, that there are followers, there will always be people who seek comfort, who are unwilling to stand up for themselves, and they will create institutions and armies that can be used against independent alphas if it goes that way. And I want to say two things in response to that are I think pretty important to my understanding of what we're doing in activism. One is that we are all betas in something. We are all followers in something. If we believe in economic terms, now not in the core sense. In the core sense, we can all be alphas of our own lives. We can all assert our individual sovereignty, as I do, and I think that's a separate thing. But in the sense of being leaders, I sometimes ask my audiences, to put them on the spot, how many of you designed the cut of the shirt that you're wearing right now? And everybody's like, what the hell is he talking about? I didn't design my... Well, if I was giving a lecture on fashion and design instead of politics, I would be looking down at my nose saying, what a bunch of sheeple you are. What a bunch of followers. I'll bet you don't even know who designed your shirt. I don't know who designed this. What label is on this? I got it at Walmart. You know, I don't care. When it comes to fashion design, I am happy to be a follower. When it comes to how to design electronics, I'm happy to be a follower. When it comes to programming algorithms for search engines, I am proud to be a follower. I will let other people do that shit for me. And I think it's sort of incumbent upon us, as those of us who care about the politics, to say, we're going to take leadership. We're going to be different. We're going to be the alphas in this realm. And we're going to say, look, guys, I know you want to be taken care of. I know you want to be lazy. I know you want this. Well, the best way you're going to get it is with what we're proposing, localization, because the current system is not sustainable. And a little sidebar about the technology. I mentioned that, 1 hour of human labor is worth more than it ever has been in terms of producing goods and services that create quality of life for human beings, right? We are on the verge of the point where we are going to be able to work for 1 year and support a family for the rest of our lives at the same quality of life that we enjoy today. That's around the corner. When we're about to hit this point, the zeitgeist people are right about one thing when they say post-scarcity society or economy. And there's no such thing as post-scarcity. There will always be something scarce. But in terms of human needs, housing, food, water, clothing, medical care, energy, stuff like that, we're about to have more than we know what to do with in all of those realms. Like, and I'm talking, 20, 30 years, right? All that. But what's coming along with that, and what I think is happening now, there are a lot more alphas in terms of truly being an alpha of your own life. There are a lot more people who think of themselves as free and capable than there ever have been. I think that's a product of human innovation and technology and awareness, where, genetically speaking, we're all capable of being alphas. At some point in our ancestry, all of us somewhere in our family tree probably had one guy who at some point in some caveman tribe was an alpha, right? Because that's, to pass your genes along, there's some beta strategies, but you got to at some point take charge and make shit happen for yourself. And with the empowerment that's coming with technology that we're experiencing today, I think that beta phenomenon of like us, think about you and me, Kevin. We were the biggest betas we could possibly be by saying, sure, politicians, you want us to go to Iraq and kill people we've never met? We'll go do that. This is why I said before that joining the military in the United States today it's not only un-American, because the founders of this country were against the standing army. They wanted a militia-based defense. They knew that a militia is a more effective defense. The only reason you need a military is to protect political power and to exploit people. So it's negligible. I'm sorry, it's negligent. It is negligent for you and me. When you and I joined the military and volunteered to go to Iraq, we were negligent. We were the ultimate betas. And that is the way.
I get what you're saying, but I do think you don't give the military enough credit. I think that the rank and file are very awake to what's going on and very much would like to see less government. It was my experience that most people in the military were very constitutionalist minded and libertarian leaning. And if they had the ability, they would have marched on Washington and taken all those people out. Now, the commander...
They do. We do. Why didn't we? Because we were being betas. Because we were being subservient.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, they would need some sort of guarantee or public mandate for that. And that's where we don't get it. But I see what you're saying.
Because the population is largely betas as well and supports that kind of beta behavior.
And we'd have to change the whole zeitgeist. And that's why I go back to the fact that the elites control the zeitgeist. And even though, yes, people are more independent in certain ways, my mother was an environmentalist, and she was one of the lead environmentalists for the state of Louisiana. She had a big department there, and she would tell me about how the other federal, mostly federal EPA employees who she dealt with, they were all pushing this agenda where they want to push people into major cities because they're easier to control and they cause less pollution. And so I think that we win one battle. Yeah, we're more independent, maybe with certain aspects of thought and more liberated because of technology. But at the same time, cities are booming. They're growing at an exponential rate, and people in those cities are less reliant on cars, so they don't sympathize or empathize with those of us who need cars or who want to live in the suburbs. They think of us as consumers, as polluters. And so at the same time, I think Americans were more liberty-minded in a lot of ways when we had a bigger rural population. And I do think that we ignore that aspect of freedom, that frontiersman spirit that we once had. I think it goes a long way in being independent from government. Now, something else I want to say, and it's something I touched on before, is I agree that we should seek more liberty and more cooperation between people. But again, what is the practical solution besides shouting from the rooftops? And that's something I do on my channel all the time, although I have become more black-pilled as of late. I do say, look, we have these different options to try to change things. But when it's obvious that democracy is not going to work for us, do we just wait it out? Is that your plan, to wait it out until the zeitgeist changes? Because we've seen where they control social media to manipulate how the public feels, and it works.
So I think you've raised a lot of legitimate fears and concerns about this. What I see is that this is, again, just inherent to the progress of humanity. And while all of those things that you point out are potential threats to the progress that I'm seeing, I don't think any of them come even close to being able to reverse the long-term historical trends of human progress. And it's about pushing secession, about pushing community sovereignty with the ultimate objective of a society that embraces individual sovereignty. And I would just point out that this is already happening. I'm not talking about bucking any trends. I'm talking about just pushing the good ones and accelerating them. Because, hey, Brexit, Scottish independence vote, Catalonian independence, the independence movement in Alaska, Hawaii, Vermont, New Hampshire, Texas, 51st State Project in Colorado, state of Jefferson, Northern California, Southern Oregon, and now California, one of the most big government states in the country. Even they want to secede because they understand it in an undeniable way. That part of it comes with the awareness of the internet, that we don't have to do it the way it's always been just because it's always been that way. There is a trend already towards localization of people demanding that community kind of sovereignty. So I think the position that you're, and you're not quite taking it here, but the position that you're suggesting here the position that you're taking of, it's not going to happen through democracy, and that, these trends are going to be overcome by what we see in front of us in the immediate present reality. I just think that's kind of divorced from the reality that I observe in the historical trends of human progress.
Well, okay, let's look at California too real quick, because if California wants to exit, I will move to California and vote for Cal exit myself.
And then move
out of our union. But I like the state of Jefferson idea. I like the idea of the Free State Project. We on the right are being fractured through subversion, and our institutions are being attacked through subversion. And I would like to see all those institutions be taken apart personally. Even the university system, a great example is in the university system, completely dependent on federal government, completely usurped by the left, pushing out one school of thought only, and a bad school of thought at that, and writing papers with research bias to hurt Americans and prohibit our liberties. So what's our answer to even that more local problem like the universities? Do we all withdraw? Maybe, but then our kids don't have college degrees, and then they give scholarships and all these other programs to people who would build a low trust society. And when I say betas, I'm not necessarily talking about, the beating on your chest alpha versus the cowering beta. I'm talking about the people who have to identify as some sort of group, whether it's LGBTQ or black or whatever. They give all these people these scholarships based on those identities, and then they divide them inside these institutions and pit them against the rest of us. And so these people are being brainwashed into hating us. On top of that, they don't have any individual identity anymore. And that is something we have seen. That is a trend that has not progressed in our favor.
So, Kevin, I didn't mention it earlier because you didn't get so far into it, but I'm kind of surprised and disappointed that you still put so much stock in the relevancy of the left-right spectrum. You say us, like the right. It's like, well, if you define the left as people who want big government and don't care about freedom, well, the only people on the right are the libertarians, because conservatives and Republicans, by that definition, are very, very, very much on the left, far left. You know, if you want to put it in,
yeah, I tend to break it down more into people who are pro-liberty are nationalists and populist minded, not necessarily complete libertarians either, but the people that are being tossed away by the mainstream, being basically put in internet ghettos, the people whose ideas are in danger.
There's an important differentiation there, because you said nationalists and people who care about freedom, and those are really contradictory terms, because nationalism is about collectivism. That's a collective. Nationalism is a collectivist philosophy. It's not a freedom philosophy. It's not an individual philosophy. And if you say people who are willing to do, physical removal and impede free flow of movement and use violence against peaceful people on their own property, those aren't people that I consider us. That's not someone. Those aren't people who I want to, at least ideologically associate myself with, because I believe in individual freedom. I believe in peace and harmony and nonviolence. And I don't believe that we should be forced into any collective, that all collectives should be voluntary. So someone who's a nationalist is on the left. A nationalist, someone who wants to collectivize things by force.
I could get into this. When I talk about nationalism, I think most nationalists, I'm not talking about the Nazis out there, National Socialists. I'm talking about people who are nationalist minded, who love America and our founding values. And I do group people in who do not want open borders. I think there's a good reason for not wanting open borders, because you're going to let in a bunch of people who would vote against your liberties.
Hold on,
but
let in what though? See, as soon as you say let in, you're showing that you're a collectivist. You're showing that you're a leftist, Kevin. When you say we can't let those people into this country, you're a leftist, because you're saying that we should have a collective territory and we should have it defended by socialized defense programs. I disagree. I think that's anti-freedom, and I think you're revealing that really you are a leftist by your own definition when you want to control people's freedom of movement. I think that's a really dangerous idea, because you know that contradicts the ethical premises of freedom.
No, I don't want to. All right, I want to control certain people's freedom of movement, specifically people's whose freedom of movement goes against the values.
If you want to control the movement of people in some way other than on your own property, you are a central planning collectivist who is using force to violently impede other people's freedom to do what they want on their property. I live in Arizona. I have 10 acres. I have a right as the owner of that property to invite whoever I want from anywhere on this planet to be on my property. And if you stand in their way, you are impeding my rights as a property owner. You are taking a leftist, collectivist, anti-freedom position.
Sure. And like I said in the beginning, I would be much more libertarian minded if we lived in a high trust society where everybody would agree to those terms and wouldn't use democracy to enforce their own agendas on us. But let's take your argument. You have a piece of property. You want to invite anybody in the world. My wife.
It doesn't work that way.
Well, I'm just saying, let's say you have a piece of property. Now, let's say your neighbors have a piece of property and you guys are in a cooperative and you have your own community there, but you're still living under democracy and the system that's set up against us. And people, and you talk about, being a collectivist, but the collectivists are ones, and specifically the elites, are the ones who want more flow of undocumented immigrants. When you talk about that, you have these people who live on their property and they've agreed to pay for a school or do whatever else a community, a small town would do, or a libertarian collective. But let's say you're still living under this government system. And this is what I talked about earlier. Even if we break away, they will still use the laws of the government and democracy against us. And so when we start trying to have this social contract with our community and say, look, we don't want these people here because they are going to vote against our liberties, they're going to vote for more welfare. The government's there saying, no, you can't say that. We're going to resettle 20,000 refugees in your town. And so, look, I think that
now hold on. Now you're talking about a different thing when it's government actually forcing resettlement of some way or supporting it. I'm totally against that, obviously. I'm just for the freedom of movement.
But what else is there at this point in time to protect us from that, other than Americans who have those common interests in trying to build a society more like what the founding fathers intended, where we had more or maximized liberty and more decentralization? How can we protect that when they're flooding our society and using democracy to build this model that will vote against that?
The answer to your question is to assert values and principles consistently and not compromise them in order to have some kind of short-term gain or to say that the means justify the ends, because they don't. And what you're saying is that we can magically somehow, two wrongs will make a right. I mean, come on. We heard this from our mothers growing up. Two wrongs don't make a right. Just because someone else wants to do something bad to you doesn't mean that you should want to do something bad to them. If anything, you should want to help them so that they don't want to do that in the first place, and be ready to defend yourself on principle. But again, this goes back to the preemptive thing. What you're talking about is using preemptive violence. And what you're doing in that is legitimizing violence. You're saying it's okay. If you really want to achieve a free society, you have to stand on consistent principle and reject the initiation of violence in every single form and not give in to that evil, but say, no, I'm going to stand up to it in every form. I'm not going to say, well, these guys did this thing, so I'm not going to stoop to their level.
Well, that's great. I mean, you can pick that hill to die on, but I'm just saying that,
No, I'm going to live on this hill. You're going to die with statism. Your answer is death. Your answer is more violence and more perpetuation of the system and putting more guns in the hands of trigger pullers, telling them to be obedient to politicians. That's a hill to die on.
I'm not advocating for statism through national. Look, when I think of nationalism, I think of, even localism. I think of myself as a person from Boyce, Louisiana first, which is a small community on Lake Coteau where there's only, maybe 1,000 people living on that lake. That's my most local form of nationalism, or even my family. But I do think that we can ally with those same people who want to create a better society, because look, our children are going to grow up here in this country. So we should have some say. If we're going to be stuck under democracy, we should have some say over what happens in this country and limit our risks to those, our children's lives being further impeded or cut off short by, let's say, MS-13 gangsters. And I know you'll say that that's
no, you didn't do that. You know that the cartels only exist because of the government. That if it wasn't for the drug war, that wouldn't be a problem.
Sure. But now they do exist. And let me just say this. I know you think that's fearful, but my wife and I live in El Salvador about 3 months out of every year. She's from El Salvador. She came here legally. She's a doctor. I would love to see more people like her come here. She's very, very right-wing minded. But when we live in El Salvador, when we live in El Salvador, we have to live behind 12-foot fences with 5 security guards out front because her family or a political family there, and they are anti-communist, so they're constantly under threat. And there's something a lot of people don't know about gangs like MS-13. They are our worst nightmare about government times 1,000, because they have standards that are enforced by this hive-mindedness where they have to go out and kill a family member or some innocent person just to get in that gang. And I want to reduce the risk of those types of people moving into our communities while we're stuck living under this system that wants to flood these our communities with these people for no valid reason. For no valid reason.
So I think there's been a really gross distortion of the risks in order to get people in America today to be afraid of Mexicans. And I'm just being general and inclusive here.
I'm talking about MS-13. I
know, but just generally speaking,
all over the place. But again, you're
MS-13. Hold on. How many? So we use these statistics because you know, when we went to war, Kevin, it was, you got to be afraid of those Arabs and those Muslims and the terrorists who are going to come over and take your, no, they're not going to take your jobs. They're going to blow you up, right? Yeah, that was them. But that fear, if you just put it in perspective for 1 second, you know that the average American, according to government's own numbers, is over 50 times more likely to be killed by a cop than by a terrorist. I would imagine that the numbers for comparison for how many people, how many Americans who had no direct involvement with the drug war or with these gangs in any kind of business way, that the number of Americans who have been killed by MS-13 gang members in just random acts of violence is far lower than those killed by police officers in the United States. Certainly lower than the number of people who have been killed by U.S. soldiers in foreign wars just in the last 2 decades. Certainly less people have had their businesses shut down by MS-13. Certainly less people have been given speeding tickets by MS-13. Certainly less people have had their lives ruined by being sent to jail for no good reason than MS-13. Those are things that the government does. The cure that you're proposing is worse than any perception of the disease, no matter how you look at it, even if you see it as a disease. But no, the cure is, if you're saying that government is the cure, that we're going to turn to democracy to limit the movement of people who should be free, you're creating a bigger problem than you're solving.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying there is a will of the people to keep these groups out, or at least vet them before they come in. But I'm saying that the reason we're being flooded with these groups is to create a low trust society, is to be able to divide us further, is to undermine people on the right who want a more free society. It's done on purpose, and you know, it's not just murder.
I'm not contesting that.
Go ahead.
I just don't want you to repeat yourself on this, because I acknowledge your point here that there are a lot of immediate manipulations, and yes, especially it's among Democrats who think that the majority of these people coming in are going to vote Democrat, and they're correct. I'm not disputing that. But again, if you fight fire with fire, you get more fire. If you want to put out the fire, you use water. And turning to the government to solve a problem created by government is just going to get you more government.
Well, I agree. I mean, that's why I still think our best solution is either one, we break away from the government somehow, which I think is more or less impossible, or two, we build these small breakaway communities. And my problem with that, again, goes back to they will flood those communities with people that we don't necessarily want in those communities. And that's going to be done by design to undermine us. Or they will call us terrorists, or they will call us racist.
If it's a private property community, though, you can keep those people out.
No, I mean, they use the fair housing laws against us in that case, or any other reason.
Not if you, now, I mean, if you, now, I don't know about the community where your land is, but where I am in northern Arizona, we're very, it's all private property based. It's all very separated. There's no, like, it's all super rural. if you want that, you can still get that in America. You know,
Okay, but what?
so
Oh, sorry.
Kevin,
Go ahead.
yeah, no, I kind of want to. I want, if you don't mind, I kind of want to transition to wrapping this up because,
Yeah,
you
go
know,
ahead.
I think I've gained a better appreciation for your position and you know the intellectual motivations behind it. But what we've also found is a lot of common ground here, and I would hope if I can convince you of one thing that isn't really so much changing your worldview, but maybe some of your analyses or some of your subjective weighing of one thing against another in all of this, I would just hope that our conversation has at least convinced you that you are better off, if you really care about freedom in America, putting your effort towards those positive building efforts of building local communities and fighting to localize government, rather than, you know, being sucked into the short term tinkering with the system. Well, as long as we're under democracy, let's do this. Hey man, step back, take a deep breath and go, what's really worth fighting for? And I would just hope, you know, for you that at least, you know, you've gotten some consideration of that from hearing my perspective.
No, I think so, definitely. You know, sometimes you need to be snapped out of your own ego, and I think that's a problem right now on the right, and I think that steps back to the internet censorship and these internet ghettos that we're being forced into. You know, once they start to censor you, then you're like, screw them, helicopter rides for everybody. So I think that, you know, we can benefit, and I say this again, on the right, across the board on the right, people who want to protect the founding principles of this country and who do want to see government downsized at some point, even if it's not right away. We can all get together and try to build breakaway communities as another option. And so I do want to talk more about those solutions moving forward. I think the time, my biggest point of bringing all this up tonight was, I think the time for us to rely on democracy to save us is past, and we really just need to start finding solutions and common ground with people on the right, even traditional Democrats or people who are maybe a little more skeptical of the mainstream narratives and the government narratives.
Man, half the time you keep saying people on the right, it sounds like you're talking about libertarians. It's almost like you're. It's so frustrating to me because you keep saying people on the right who care about freedom, and I'm like, you mean libertarians who aren't on the right? Because you know that's and really you're obviously way more libertarian than conservative.
Well, I think we've lost a lot of libertarians to the alt-right and to other groups because we've been fractured and divided against each other on these smaller issues, and because we are under attack. So, you know, I think that we can bring all those people back into some middle ground at least. And I think that's, you know, that's what I really hope that we can start focusing on more now that we are starting to wake up to the fact that this is all coming to an end right now. Yeah. The country that we all hoped for is not going to happen without direct action of some sort. Not necessarily physical movement. But
you just, localization unites us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. So, do you have anything else you want to add to this? I mean, we can wrap it up now. It's been a long conversation here.
I'll just say that if anybody's still listening at this point, so far in, remember, this is two combat veterans talking here. And I think that if you know any other veterans who would benefit from hearing this conversation, I would hope that you would share this video with them. I hope that you'll take it into consideration for whatever it is that you're doing as an activist in your own life. And, you know, Kevin, thank you so much for making this happen. And I really appreciate the way that we've been able to do this. It's been a lot of fun. And, yeah, man, I hope to see you at the Libertarian Party convention in 2020.
Yeah,
when I'll be the nomination.
Yeah, I'd love to go. I hope they let me in through the doors. But I tell you, I agree with you 100%.
I hope you'll be there as a delegate for your state.
Yeah, you know, maybe they'll let me back in, the prodigal son, right? I agree with you 100% that we need to reach out to veterans more. Sometimes I feel like I don't do enough to give back to our brethren in that community, and I think that those people are the leaders, that we can build for this country we want. I think there's a lot of strengths in our veteran community. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. Yeah. Now again, when you run for president, you got to keep a spot open for me to help those guys. And if nothing else, if you get blackpilled, then I'll be your second in command on dealing with the yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it was great talking, man. I really appreciate this. I'll load it up to my groups on Facebook and my channel. I might edit a little bit, but I'll either break it up or put it in whole and in parts.
Cool. Thank you so much, man, brother.
We'll keep in touch. Maybe we can do something else, in the future.
Peace and love to you, brother.
Yeah, man. You too.